Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with SS&C Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I am joined by my fellow co-host, Michael Marchuk.
Hey, Brad.
Hello, Michael. He and I thought it would be nice to do a short episode with just the two of us now that we are at the midpoint of 2023. And instead of just chewing the fat and talking about books or movies or sports or any of those great topics, we thought that we would each come to this episode with questions that we can ask each other related to intelligent automation, perhaps topics that have been on our mind lately because we've talked about them on the podcast or we've written about them, whatever it might be. So we've called this episode Automation Scattershooting. Can't really think of a better name for it. So without further ado, let's get into it. And Michael, let me ask you the first question. I think you're like a few months older than me. So age before beauty, as they say.
I've just turned 29, just like you.
Don't we wish? So Michael, on the podcast, you've been speaking with quite a few guests that have talked about change management. When it comes to digital transformation, why do you think this keeps coming up?
I see this as something that is critical for success. When we look at any change program or any digital transformation program, there's a lot involved in it that has very little to do with technology. It has a lot to do with the people and the people who are planning the program, people who are being affected by the program, the organization, whether that's a commercial organization or a government organization who's trying to create some outcome that they're really looking to build on with automation or automation techniques. So when we start seeing the technology as it approaches these various issues or objectives that these organizations want to go after, there's oftentimes a big issue that is non-technical. It's related to the people who are, again, being affected or planning the change. So when we start looking into it more closely, all the guests that we've talked to and the books that I've read, they really go through this concept of the way that work is changing. And it has something to do with the fact that we've got technology affecting that, with all the different generative AI stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's a non-technical issue because people are reacting or assimilating the change that is coming at them from a technology standpoint and trying to apply it in a way that's beneficial to their organization. And when they start reviewing that, it really opens up the ideas that we really have to change what we're doing and how we're doing it, how we're approaching things to be able to either take advantage of these new efficiencies or effective ways of managing our customers or our constituents. We have to do that in a way that broadens out the way the people are doing their jobs now, our current employees or workers are doing their jobs right now, which generally changes what they're doing. So we're taking technology, we're bringing in these digital workers, and they're extremely effective at what they're doing, but we can't just have them, as you say, assume a human's role within the organization, because anything else, if you take a sports team, for example, if you drafted this high-profile star to your new team, it's likely that the coach is going to want to reposition the current players they have on their team, not because they're lesser players, but because of the strengths that are brought in from these new players that are brought in from the draft. How can we take their strengths plus the strengths of the current players and create a very strong winning team? And so when you apply that kind of concept into an organization, you have the same kind of viewpoint. We're bringing in this new workforce, these digital workers who have certain strengths. And honestly, there's some things they're not really good at. So how can we take what people are fantastic at and apply them to roles that leverage those things they're really good at and apply digital workers to the roles that they're really good at? And we find that oftentimes that means the roles actually have to change. And so now we have a role type that has been doing one thing for a long period of time, and it has to change it to be something else where those parts of that role are taken and put into a digital worker's new role. And that person who was doing that role takes the other parts of that role and maybe rolls it together with some new things that are happening because of the technology that they're rolling into, and it changes their role. So it needs to be training and upskilling, et cetera. So change management is critical when you start looking at an effective program for digital transformation. One of the things that we've gone through, the discussions we've had with many of our guests, keeps coming up on these new capabilities that automation has and where they can go with them, or the new technologies that can be brought in to accelerate digital transformations and whatnot. But a lot of companies aren't there yet. So why are so many companies not scaling their automation capabilities like we'd expect them to?
That's a pretty loaded question. It's definitely a pervasive problem across the globe. You and I definitely know that very well. And it's not just for smaller companies, I have to point out. I think most companies start their automation journey in a similar manner. They have a significant business pain point that automation can solve. They're wanting to do it without having to rely on IT. They have strong business sponsorship. They have funding. So they move forward to build out their first set of automations, typically using a third-party partner, right? Then, and this is a critical pivot point. So then they develop a center of excellence to support and sustain their new automation capability. And with the right guidance from the partner, they will follow some form of robotic operating model, perhaps Blue Prism's proprietary ROM2. But then things sometimes take an unfortunate turn at this point. So what I see happening a lot is the COE will then get placed far down in the IT organization. The connection to the business operations weakens or goes away completely. And the COE is left with limited sponsorship and an IT team surrounding them that doesn't feel like they really should own this, or that they're not really part of the solution. So then the COE may get under-resourced as a result, or a lack of cooperation from IT. And I think it's really the combination of all these things that can greatly diminish the ability of a company to scale their automation capability and to even go out and find additional automation opportunities and build the pipeline and secure the funding and get the sponsorship to turn it into a reality. So it doesn't always happen this way. As you know, we have plenty of customers that are exceptions to this. I'm thinking of Alberta Health Services, who came on the podcast and talked about how they've scaled their program pretty rapidly just within the first couple years of starting their automation journey. So it doesn't happen to everyone, but I think for a lot of companies, this is what reality looks like. And I don't think anyone's doing it with bad intentions. I think they have good intentions. I just think the way that automation gets compartmentalized and stuck way down in the IT organization and not really treated as an enterprise solution, that's a big part of it.
We've seen that for sure. And several of our customers that we've talked to personally, but we also seen a lot of success, as you mentioned. There's definitely successful organizations out there who are seeing it differently.
Yeah. And Michael, let me turn this around to you, my friend, and say, so how do we fix this?
How do we fix it? Yeah. Well, I think that's part of what we're doing with the podcast, honestly, is bringing people information about how other organizations have been successful in their attempts. Because we certainly see a lot of success in addition to those who are struggling. There is a lot of success out there, and bringing those lessons learned from folks who have done it and have fought through that is one way that we can present this new finding that we're seeing. Like, hey, this company's doing this well, and you wouldn't get this any other way, but other than perhaps we're reading case studies or other things online. But our podcast really tries to narrow that down and distill it in a way that gives people some hope. You say, listen, they've done it. They're able to move forward, and it may not be easy, or it may not be exactly the way you thought you'd do it, but there's definitely ways forward to getting the benefits and the outcomes you're looking for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I do think just knowing how to market or sell or tell the story within the organization, that seems to be a missing element in a lot of programs. They want to get the word out, they want to have the publicity and the visibility, but it's often hampered for a number of reasons. I'm going to be talking to one of our customers on the podcast in the next few weeks. And at their organization, they actually do a birth announcement, a bot birth announcement every time they do a process automation. And they push this out to the company and they have a lot of fun with it, but they use it as a way to say, look, this is an automation that we've just done. It's launched a new bot, if you will. And they treat it like a birth announcement in a pretty funny way. And they've gotten a lot of good results from that. So lots of interesting creative ways to combat that for sure. Okay. Going to question number 2 for you, Michael. So you have been quite the generative AI ramp up example here in the last year. You've been reading every book and every article and talking to every expert under the sun on this topic. And just yesterday, I was reading a report, you may have seen it, from Goldman Sachs that said that generative AI could drive a $7 trillion increase in global GDP and lift productivity growth by 1.5 percentage points over a 10-year period, which is pretty incredible. As you've talked with a lot of experts in this space and done a lot of reading and stuff yourself, where do you see organizations actually implementing generative AI at this point?
If we will go to, say, last fall, the end of 2022, when ChatGPT was released to the market and a broader audience of folks really started to understand what this whole concept of generative AI could look like. And a lot of folks signed up for it and are still signing up for it to experiment. And unfortunately, with a lot of these new technologies, we see a lot of the experimentation going forward, saying, well, what can we do with this? What kind of capabilities does it have? So going through the general list of things, we've seen all kinds of entertainment, certainly either with image generation, people create silly pictures of the Pope wearing a puffy coat, that kind of stuff, to understand how they can write emails, or as you've tried one time, lyrics to a song or a poem. These are things that are bringing out the creativity in people and also extending the way they ask questions and interface with technology. There's a learning curve that we're all on with part of this, which is how do I now interface with this new technology to generative AI in order to actually get something productive out of it? Because there are certainly things you can do with it that are not business related. But how do I actually get something that's really business related and actually get benefit for my organization? One is this training of how do I interface? So we've seen a ton of folks right now going through that process of opening up the conceptual doors, if you will, on how would I bring this in? So there's plenty of proofs of concept or that kind of stuff, but what they're actually doing with it tends to be, say, low risk. We're going to help have generative AI create email templates for us based on certain things. We're going to have them review marketing materials and maybe provide some additional capabilities for us in terms of building out new things, create titles or even outlines for white papers to be able to bring that to market in a way that perhaps we can get some faster production. So not necessarily impacting the business as much as it is creating new content to be able to showcase either the company or ideas that are happening along with it. All fantastic ideas, but it's really just starting in terms of how things can move forward. So we start looking at what folks are doing right now in terms of the application of it. There are organizations who are bringing this large language model kind of concept and bundling it along with a solution that targets a very specific type of environment. Let's take the pattern recognition for doing fraud management, that kind of stuff. Fantastic example of being able to see a lot of data and leveraging that data based on patterns and training to see now this new pattern that may emerge from a fraud perspective that can be caught early and reduce the risk to the organization. That's a really good application for it. Marketing teams, again, have been using this a lot to be able to help create new content from their marketing perspective. When it comes to the actual business itself, transactionally, I think we're still behind on the transactional side of things because generative AI, as the name implies, is actually creating something or building on something, leveraging a large language model that encompasses not only the knowledge within whatever training set that is, which could be an internal company's organizational knowledge base, so they could help create smarter chatbots and whatnot, but it really focuses on that interaction or creation of stuff. When you look at transactional processing, I'm thinking at this point in time, right now, generative AI is not as strong on the transactional processing perspective. Not that it can't be, but I think the tuning for how it's being used does not necessarily lend itself well to that at this point in time, but it certainly could.
So my third question for you was also on generative AI. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that if that's okay. I want you to talk about where you see generative AI going as it relates to automation within both the private and public sectors, if you could.
Sure. There's something called Auto GPT, which has a sort of objective-based concept, taking the description that you have, and I'll use a real simple one, which is plan out a trip for me to a specific destination so that I'm able to go in and see all the hot spots in the area that are related to history. So it can then take that and not only identify what those things are, but then go back to the train schedules, identify what those train schedules are, and run through this whole process to basically lay out an itinerary for you. And that whole concept is one thing after another that kind of stack on top of each other to create that outcome, which is I need an itinerary for doing this. But there's a lot of multiple steps that are embedded in that to get the information sorted out and understand that, yes, you would take a train from point A to point B, but if you're doing that at this time of day, you may need to understand when the trains run. So therefore, here's the train that would run from here to here. When is this attraction open or closed? Making sure that you get there in time to be enough time to see it, et cetera. So again, this is a very benign kind of solution, but that's where the current state is going through to create that sort of thing. If we look into the future, and this is something that's just based on how I understand things right now and where I think they could be going, automation itself could look very, very different than it does right now. Right now, the training that we do for our own digital workers, but this applies across the entire automation landscape that we have right now, is related to training those digital workers to do a process or set a process through it. If in fact we make a transition to this objective viewpoint where we bring a digital worker in who has the capabilities of leveraging generative AI to review not only the process, but also the steps within the process, they may choose to implement that process in a different way. And this is where the whole governance model really comes into play, but they may choose a different path to end up with that objective that either people wouldn't necessarily think of or people wouldn't do because of the number of steps it would take, the number of back and forth between departments that it might take. But having a digital worker who can understand the end-to-end, understand where that data is located, understand what the objective is, at the end of the day, it may take all that stuff, can synthesize a new process that then can be brought to the organization, allowing you to understand, here's another way of looking at how to get that information, which may be either more efficient or provide a different kind of viewpoint or different insight on how to do it. So along the way, it's not just us defining the process. It may be generative AI reviewing the objectives and redefining the process, and then applying that redefined process with permissions, of course, to be able to allow it to execute upon that with the right governance. So is it possible that in the future, these kind of things where we say we need to have an efficient tax structure for working in this new geographic area as we sell our products and deliver our products and create our products in that geographic area, and have generative AI create a full-on process for that shows how we build it, distribute it, sell it, and service it in that area that becomes more tax efficient, because that was what our objective was. So all these things could be happening in the future as we start looking at where generative AI could be, but it really is taking the general basis of the technology and applying it that way for our organizations.
That's so interesting. And I don't know if you've done much reading on Code Interpreter, the recent ChatGPT product that just came out, but Now ChatGPT with Code Interpreter can analyze data, it can create charts, it can edit files, it can perform math. I've been thinking ever since I read about it, about how you could take process mining outputs, feed them into Code Interpreter, and let it come back to you and make suggestions or recommendations on what to go and automate or how to automate or what kind of business case you have to go this direction versus this direction.
Right.
All of that is becoming within the realm of possibility.
And it's all going towards that final objective. What are you trying to accomplish with this? And then what you're trying to accomplish is some kind of real world objective. Like, for example, hey, we want to address our ESG footprint. And I know it's something that you've done a lot with too as well, is how do we address our ESG footprint in a way that makes our company better from the environment, better from a social perspective in terms of social equity, and do it so that the governance model that we applies fairly across the board. So when we start doing that, is there really a relationship between intelligent automation and ESG? I think there might be.
ESG has meandered off into the background. People aren't talking about it quite as much because of generative AI, but it's still top of mind. It's still a big deal. And as I have researched ESG more and more, because I'm really not an expert in the area, but I'm learning more and more every day. As I've researched it, to me, what I conclude is to do ESG well essentially requires you to do three things for companies to do these things: broaden visibility, be more predictive, and then think more proactively. And all three of those things, I think you would agree, Michael, are things that can be positively impacted by intelligent automation. So let me just quickly kind of break down each of those a little bit further. So broadening visibility, we're talking about everything ESG reporting requires. And this is ramping up further and further, especially with all the new guidance and regulations from local and federal authorities. So you have to collect and manage and validate so much data now to do ESG in a consistent manner. And ESG itself is really hinged on transparency. And so digital workers can bring a lot of that. They can bring a lot more documentation and auditability. And the bottom line is it's incumbent upon companies to make sure that they have a good story to tell, and they've got to have really good numbers and facts. And intelligent automation can provide the arms and legs to do that, to gather the data, to consolidate it, to move data between a lot of disparate systems and data sources and all those things. So that's broadening visibility. The second discipline that ESG requires is becoming more predictive. And really, even more than RPA, it's the AI age that has provided companies with the ability to be more predictive. But when you take RPA, digital workers, you combine them with AI, now you can take inputs like IoT sensor readings to monitor industrial operations in real time, and then use that to find optimization opportunities that can reduce emissions, that can prevent harm to humans and the environment, that can allow companies to get more out of their existing infrastructure and not have outages that are bad for them financially, but also in terms of their ESG responsibilities. So that's becoming more predictive, using AI with the help of digital workers. That can be the arms and legs. And then third, just thinking proactively. To me, this involves digital workers leveraging process mining as one major capability to provide a more fact-based visualization of how work gets done. And then by doing that, you can surface ESG issues, you can find ways to be more sustainable, you can find potential hazards, you can look at safety incidents and use that data and get it to the right people so they can avoid risk situations. There's so many ways that companies can be more proactive and by taking advantage of automation and what digital workers are able to surface. So those are three things that have just been sticking out in my head. And so when people say, can automation really make a difference? I go right to those three and I say, yes, it can absolutely make a huge difference.
So you mentioned a bunch of things about the various industries that are taking advantages from an ESG perspective, but if you kind of step back and look at just the broader market or a specific industry sector, they're not all the same. Some will be
Right.
far more industrious, if you will, or apply automation far more rapidly than maybe another type of market or industry. Can you give me some examples that, in your opinion, of these markets or industries where they're really not taking full advantage of intelligent automation?
Ooh, wow. There's a bunch of them. I would say retail is in that category, oil and gas, legal, and there's probably two or three others that I could pinpoint. But the one I'm going to highlight here that's been on my brain for a very long time, and it's private equity. I believe that the private equity sector is ripe for automation. The way that these organizations buy and sell and manage portfolio companies, I mean, it is largely done the same way that it's been done for decades. There's a lot of data cleansing, data movement, systems replacement, systems sunsets, personnel changes, personnel training, hiring, firing, moving things around. I mean, in the midst of all of that, there's just this incredible sense of urgency around getting these companies, these portfolio companies, operationally headed in the right direction. And in my mind, intelligent automation could play a significant role in doing those things better and faster and more seamlessly. Now, these automations don't exist such that you can just plug them in and they're ready to go. But the first private equity who figures this out and makes the investment to build out an automation capability that they can use in M&A over and over again, I guarantee they're going to see accelerated and higher quality onboarding of new portcos. They also could leverage a third party to do this. I forgot to mention that, but they don't have to build this out themselves. They could use a third party or even a software vendor to build out this sustainable capability. But this dialogue has gone on for a while and no one seems willing to step up to the plate and take a big swing. And it's unfortunate because I think it really could help these companies do what they do a lot faster and a lot more efficiently.
Well, I know we've spoken at these private equity events, and the challenge you have is related to the folks that are doing this work. Most of them, while they are operationally focused in terms of the industry that that particular portfolio company, or as you just mentioned, Portco, because you're cool and all the PE terms, that is really something that they're focused on. I'm looking at making this manufacturer or this retail organization more efficient. So I'm looking at the retail components of that. When he looks back at the IT operation stuff, nearly all of them will do it the same way. We're just going to standardize by taking what they have right now and transforming it and bringing it over to the standardized version that we have with our other portfolio companies and do that over a short period of time. But we're going to spend a lot of money making that transition happen versus potentially leveraging digital workers who could interface with these systems and A, save them a lot of time and money, but B, do it in a way that allows them to have these organizations be a lot more interfaced in a way that they can remove them. Because these private equity companies will generally buy a company, hold it, build it, put their expertise into it, and then they'll look to sell it off at the end of the day because they've added new value to it. So that transitioning in and out is something that they're well used to doing, but it's also still very cumbersome for them to move that new thing in and out. So leveraging digital workers sounds like the right way to do it because it really gives them an opportunity to say, well, here's the digital workers that are doing this for whomever else is purchasing it, allowing them then to take it over quickly and move forward with the efficiency that organization had already built into it.
Yep. Completely agree. I think, like I said, the first one that figures it out is going to be like a rocket ship and it's going to speed up their acquisition engine. It's going to allow them to turn the crank faster and see improvement in these companies. So yeah, I think it's an idea that has been out there for a while. And I think before you and I hang up our cleats and go into retirement, we'll see some private equities jump on board and make this happen.
So we're talking about these organizations that are getting more efficiencies and whatnot in the private equity world and through other industries and whatnot. Is digital labor going to be responsible for actually raising human salaries over time?
Ooh, wow. That is a really good question. I will take a stab at it if you do the same. So let me go first. Will digital labor raise human salaries over time? Bear with me on this. I think if you remove the mundane, the repetitive, the busy work, that allows humans to be more human, to be more creative, more productive, more satisfied, more valuable overall to the company. So that should organically drive professional advancement and higher salaries. In fact, I would submit that the busy work in most jobs is what holds people back from excelling in their vocation. Let's say that you had an extra 2 hours per day, Michael, to think and plan and strategize and create and innovate. How would that impact your performance, your excitement about your job? I think it would make a huge difference. And I think it is making a huge difference in those companies that are embracing automation and applying it everywhere they can to drive value. So again, if you follow that line of thought, I believe more automation where digital workers enable companies to be more efficient, to be more profitable, will drive higher salaries for the human workers. Intelligent automation has always been about unleashing human potential. That used to be one of our kind of mission statements. So with that potential realized, humans should benefit in terms of job fulfillment and even job reward. How's that for an answer?
I think it's a great answer. And I would tend to agree. Going back to some of the discussions we've had earlier, you mentioned the busy work or the mundane activities. People are generally paid for the value that they bring to the organization. And I think that is a generality because oftentimes the roles are designed in such a way that there's no way for that role to bring value to the organization because it's designed as a transactional kind of thing. But if you start redesigning roles where you are shuffling the right players, the right employees to the right places, now you take a digital worker and put them in one role, and you put a human worker in a role that's going to let them excel. Now you're taking a new approach to allowing that employee, that human employee, to add value to the organization in a way they never could before. So I believe that over time, we're going to see this as they transition into roles that were designed for humans who are thinking about the business. They're considering the customer and how to delight the customer. They're thinking about product innovation and how they can leverage the problems that their customers are having and develop new products and ways to satisfy that. Now you're adding real value versus simply shuffling invoices or whatnot. And we bring up invoice processing all the time because that's the poster child of automation. But the reality is that some of the work that's done within an organization, it has to be done. Unless you find a way to do it in a more efficient way, somebody has to accomplish it. Somebody has to accept the invoice and make sure that it gets paid. Somebody has to order the raw materials for the product. Somebody has to be able to develop and design the product. So there's all these roles that exist right now. It's really applying the people and their strengths to allow them to excel, which will then in turn raise their salaries because it raises the value.
Yeah.
I always ask at the end of almost every one of my podcasts, what are you reading? Because I think that really tells a lot about how you're thinking and how it's shaping your thinking. So what are you reading right now?
I am reading the biography of Harry S. Truman.
Okay.
U.S. president. And I will tell you, it's about to kill me because it's 1,000 pages. So it's going very slowly. It's very dense. I always admired him as a president just based on some of the big decisions he had to make and things like that. But now getting into his story, I think he's easily one of my top 3 presidents. He is really amazing in terms of the things that he had to deal with and the way that he dealt with them during his 8 years in the White House. How about you, Michael? What are you reading right now?
I've got 2 that I'm in the middle of. One of them is called Machine Learning for High-Risk Applications, Approaches to Responsible AI, written by people who are way smarter than I am. So some of the stuff I have to read and reread again because these are things that are a bit foreign to me when it comes in here. But it's really interesting to see how they're approaching what they describe as high risk and how they manage through that. Yep. And the second one, I'm going to have to read you the title because this is one of those titles that only a PhD could come up with this kind of title. But what I've started so far is very interesting. epistemological attributions to entrepreneurial firms linking organizational design and operational efficiency. So I've never used the word epistemological before, but now I've used it in a sentence, and there we go. It's very interesting, a little clinical, but very interesting as they review how to bring that entrepreneurial spirit into organizational design and how to reinforce people and their contributions versus maybe the systems or the digital labor that may be supporting them.
Great stuff. Well, Michael, this has been a lot of fun. We should scattershoot more often. Let me take the last 30 seconds just to preview some of the episodes we have coming up on Transform Now. In the weeks to come, we will be talking about business process management, which is part of our portfolio of solutions at SS&C Blue Prism, but we haven't really talked about it as much as we should have. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to talk about intelligent document processing with one of our key partners in that space, the company Abby. We are also going to focus on ESG with a podcast that features AWS and Glint, which is another partner of ours. They focus on emissions reporting. And we also have a few customer conversations taking shape that I'm really excited about that are from healthcare and financial services. So a lot of really good stuff coming. We appreciate all of you for listening as always. And bye for now.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.